At my husband's funeral, I overheard my daughter-in-law whispering, "Once she's in a nursing home, we can sell the house before summer." I didn't turn around. I didn't interrupt. I simply adjusted the pearl necklace resting against my black dress and kept my eyes on the mahogany casket at the front of the chapel. "I'm glad you're here. Stay with me until the end. And tell me the city you're watching from. I want to know how far this story reaches." The chapel was filled with white lilies and the faint scent of furniture polish. Soft organ music drifted through the stained glass light. Harold's navy flag was folded with sharp precision near the front row, the blue fabric almost glowing beneath the afternoon sun. 42 years of marriage, reduced to a framed photograph beside a guest book. People approached me one by one. "He was a good man, Eleanor." "Yes," I would answer. "He was." My son stood 3 feet away, his hand resting on Vanessa's lower back as if she were the one who needed support. He avoided my eyes. I noticed that. I notice everything now. It happened when I stepped into the side hallway to catch my breath. Grief presses on the lungs in strange waves. One moment you are standing, the next you feel like you are sinking. That's when I heard her voice. Low, controlled, practical. "She won't manage that place alone," Vanessa murmured. "The stairs, the yard, the upkeep. Assisted living will be better for her. And once she's settled, we can list the property. Houses in that neighborhood are going for over 600,000. There was a soft chuckle from someone, maybe her cousin. "She won't even argue," Vanessa continued. "She's too fragile right now." Fragile. I stood perfectly still. The house she was discussing was the one Harold and I bought in 1988 when interest rates were high and money was tight. The one where we painted the kitchen cabinets ourselves because we couldn't afford contractors. The one with the maple tree he planted the day our son turned 5. That house was never just square footage. It was our life measured in seasons. Footsteps approached and I stepped back into the chapel before she could see me there. Vanessa touched my arm gently when I returned to the front. "Are you holding up?" she asked, her voice dipped in sympathy. Her mascara was flawless. "I am," I replied. And I smiled. Because 6 months before his heart gave out in the early morning quiet of our bedroom, Harold insisted on meeting with his attorney. He told me it was routine planning. Harold was not a man who believed in routine when it came to protection. As I stood beside his casket, accepting condolences, I realized something important. Vanessa believed grief had made me weak. She mistook silence for surrender. She had no idea what Harold had already put in place. And she had no idea that I heard every single word. After the funeral, the house felt larger than it had that morning. Too quiet. Too still. When people leave after a service, they take the noise with them. The casseroles sit untouched on the counter. The flowers start to lean. The sympathy fades faster than the scent of lilies. I locked the front door myself. Harold always did that. The key felt heavier in my hand than it used to. Our house stands on a quiet street just outside Columbus, Ohio. 2 stories. 4 bedrooms. A wraparound porch Harold rebuilt himself after a storm took half of it down in '96. The maple tree in the yard is taller than the roofline now. I stood in the foyer for a long moment, listening. No organ music. No whispered plans. Just the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. Grief doesn't always come as tears. Sometimes it comes as inventory. I found myself noticing everything. The slight crack in the hallway paint. The indentation on Harold's side of the couch. The faint smell of his aftershave still lingering in the bathroom. 42 years doesn't disappear quietly. It settles into the walls. My son, Daniel, arrived later that evening with Vanessa. She carried a store-bought pie as if it were an offering. He carried nothing but an expression I couldn't quite read. "We don't want you alone tonight, Mom," Daniel said. He didn't meet my eyes. "I've lived in this house for 35 years, I replied gently. "I know how to be alone here." Vanessa set the pie on the counter and began moving around my kitchen as if she were staging it for a showing. Straightening a dish towel, adjusting a chair, opening and closing cabinet doors. "You know," she began carefully, "this place is a lot to maintain. The stairs alone worry me." I poured 3 glasses of iced water and placed them on the table. "I manage the stairs just fine." She smiled, that thin, patient smile. "There are beautiful assisted living communities nearby. Activities. Security. No yard work." There it was again. Practical. Reasonable. As if they were discussing a grocery list. Daniel shifted in his seat. "We just want what's best for you." "What's best?" The phrase people use when they've already decided. I folded my hands on the table. Your father built that porch himself, I said quietly. Every board. Neither of them responded. Instead, Vanessa glanced toward the staircase, measuring it, calculating something in her mind. Later that night, after they left, I walked through each room slowly. Our bedroom still held the early morning light from the day he passed. The quilt lay folded at the foot of the bed. His reading glasses rested on the nightstand exactly where he left them. I sat on the edge of the mattress and let the silence settle. 6 months ago, Harold had come home from a meeting downtown and placed a slim folder on this very nightstand. He didn't explain much, just kissed my forehead and said, "Some things need to be clear before they're needed." At the time, I thought he was being overly cautious. Tonight, I understood something different. Vanessa saw a property value. Daniel saw a manageable solution. But Harold had seen further than either of them. And as I sat there in the quiet house they were already planning to sell, I realized something steady inside me. They thought grief had made me unaware. They were wrong. Very wrong. The morning after the funeral, Vanessa called. Not to ask how I slept. Not to ask if I'd eaten. She asked what time she and Daniel could come over to talk about next steps. Next steps. As if my marriage had been a business contract that had just expired. They arrived at 10:15 a.m. sharp. Vanessa carried a leather folder this time. Daniel carried coffee. Mine had almond milk, the way I prefer it. Small details. Thoughtful details. Details that softened decisions already made. We sat at the dining table Harold built with his own hands in 1994. Solid oak. 8 chairs. Scratch on the left corner from when Daniel dropped a toolbox at 16. Vanessa placed the folder neatly in front of her. "We've been thinking," she began. I folded my napkin carefully on my lap. "The house is nearly 3,600 square feet," she continued. "That's a lot for one person. Property taxes alone are almost $9,000 a year." She knew the numbers. Of course she did. Daniel cleared his throat. "Mom, we just don't want you overwhelmed." I looked at him. "When your father and I bought this place, we made $42,000 a year combined," I said quietly. "We managed." "This isn't about managing," Vanessa replied gently. "It's about quality of life." Quality of life. Another polished phrase. She opened the folder and slid a brochure across the table. A photograph of smiling seniors in a sunlit courtyard. Brick buildings. Trimmed hedges. Words like community, comfort, security printed in soft blue ink. "Rosewood Assisted Living," she said. "It's 5 miles from here. Beautiful facility. Restaurant-style dining." She said restaurant-style, as if it were a reward. I studied the brochure without touching it. "And the house?" I asked. Daniel shifted again. "Well, with the market the way it is, this would be the ideal time to sell. We could invest the proceeds. Make sure you're set long-term. We could invest. Not you. Not your mother." Vanessa leaned forward slightly. "We already spoke with a realtor just to get an idea. Comparable homes in the neighborhood sold within 3 weeks. Already spoke." So the funeral whisper wasn't speculation. It was scheduling. I let the silence stretch. People rushed to fill silence. Vanessa did. We'd handle everything, of course. Packing, repairs, staging. You wouldn't have to lift a finger. The generosity in her tone almost impressed me. I finally reached for the brochure and closed it gently. "When were you planning to move me?" I asked. Vanessa didn't hesitate. "Within a month would be ideal." Ideal. A month after burying my husband of 42 years. Daniel looked at the table. I watched his face carefully. I've known that face since it was red and wrinkled in a hospital blanket. He wasn't cruel. He was compliant. "There's a difference." "I appreciate your concern," I said evenly. "But I'm not making any decisions this week." Vanessa's smile tightened. Almost invisibly. "We just want to be proactive." Proactive. I stood and carried the empty coffee cups to the sink. The maple tree outside cast long morning shadows across the yard Harold loved. They thought this was about stairs. About yard work. About convenience. But as I rinsed the cups, I remembered the folder Harold left in our bedroom drawer. The one from his attorney. He had been quiet the day he brought it home. Thoughtful. Intentional. And for the first time since the funeral, I felt something steady beneath the grief. They were planning my future. Without knowing he had already planned theirs. And they still believed I hadn't heard a word in that hallway. After Daniel and Vanessa left, I didn't clean the table right away. The brochure from Rosewood Assisted Living sat where Vanessa had placed it. Sunlight from the kitchen window fell across the smiling gray-haired couple on the cover. They looked relaxed, content, almost grateful. I turned the brochure face down. Then I went upstairs. Our bedroom door was still slightly misaligned from when Harold replaced the hinges himself last winter. He said the frame had character. I said it had drafts. We argued about it for 10 minutes. Then we laughed. 42 years is a collection of small arguments that turn into private jokes. I walked to his side of the dresser and opened the second drawer from the bottom. The folder was still there. Cream-colored. Thin. Ordinary. I sat on the edge of the bed before opening it. Not because I was afraid, but because I wanted to remember him clearly before I read what he had prepared. 6 months ago, Harold came home unusually quiet. He set this same folder on the nightstand and said, "I met with Robert this afternoon." Robert Klein had been our attorney for nearly 20 years. He handled the refinancing after Daniel went to college. Helped draft the original will when Harold turned 65. "Just updating things," Harold said that day. I hadn't asked questions. We were healthy then, or so I believed. Now, sitting in the quiet bedroom, I opened the folder and began to read. The will was straightforward at first. The house would remain in my name for life. Financial accounts allocated carefully. Investments outlined clearly. But halfway through, there was an additional page. An amendment. Added recently. My eyes slowed as I read each line carefully. If any beneficiary attempted to coerce, pressure, or relocate the surviving spouse against her will. If any effort was made to force the sale of the primary residence during her lifetime, that beneficiary would forfeit their inheritance. The forfeited portion would be redirected to a veterans' housing charity Harold had supported quietly for years. I read the paragraph twice. Then a third time. Harold's signature sat at the bottom of the page. Dated 6 months ago. He knew. Not everything, perhaps, but enough. He had seen the way Vanessa walked through the house, as if measuring it. The way she asked about property values at Thanksgiving. The way Daniel stopped discussing long-term plans with me once he married her. Harold had never been a confrontational man, but he was observant, and he was protective. I closed the folder gently and rested my hand on top of it. Downstairs, the refrigerator hummed again. The maple tree scraped lightly against the siding in the afternoon wind. Everything looked ordinary. That's the thing about betrayal. It rarely announces itself loudly. It arrives disguised as practicality, as concern, as helpful suggestions about quality of life. Vanessa believed she was being efficient. Daniel believed he was being responsible. Neither of them understood that Harold had already anticipated this exact moment. I placed the folder back in the drawer and stood slowly. Grief was still there. It would be for a long time. But beneath it, something steadier had taken root. They were planning timelines, listing schedules, market windows. What they didn't realize was that one conversation with a realtor, one push too far, would cost them everything Harold intended them to receive. I walked to the window and looked out at the porch he rebuilt with his own hands. "You always thought ahead," I whispered. And for the first time since the funeral, I didn't feel alone in this house. I felt prepared. I didn't confront them the next day, or the day after that. Grief is an excellent disguise. People assume silence means surrender. It buys you time. 3 days after the funeral, Vanessa texted. "Just checking in Red Heart also. The realtor can stop by Friday if that works. Not if you're ready. Not whenever you feel comfortable. If that works." I stared at the message for a long moment before placing my phone face down on the kitchen counter. Friday. They were moving quickly. The maple tree outside swayed gently in the early spring wind. The yard needed trimming soon. Harold would have already been out there with his gloves and shears. I made myself coffee. Black. No almond milk this time. Then I called Robert Klein. He answered on the third ring. "Eleanor," he said gently. "I was going to reach out. How are you holding up?" "I've been better," I replied. "Robert, I need clarity." There was a pause on the line. Paper shuffling. "You've read the amendment," he said. "Yes. And my daughter-in-law has already contacted a realtor." Another pause. This one sharper. "Has anyone attempted to pressure you to relocate?" "They've presented brochures," I said calmly. "Timelines. Market comparisons. That qualifies as early coercive intent," he replied evenly. "But nothing is triggered until action is taken." Action. That word settled heavily. What would constitute action? I asked. "Listing the property without your consent. Filing paperwork." or creating documented pressure that could be interpreted as force. I looked around my kitchen. The ceramic bowl Harold bought in Santa Fe. The small crack in the tile near the pantry. The magnet on the fridge from Daniel's third-grade science fair. They were discussing this house like inventory. "I'd like everything documented," I said quietly. "It already is," Robert replied. Harold was very specific. Of course he was. After I hung up, I did something Vanessa would not expect. I tidied the front porch. Not because I was preparing to leave. Because I was staying. I swept the wooden boards Harold installed with his own hands. I polished the brass house numbers near the mailbox. I trimmed the hydrangeas near the steps. If a realtor was coming Friday, the house would look immaculate. Not staged. Not for sale. Just cared for. That evening, Daniel called. "Mom, Vanessa said you didn't respond about Friday." "I'll be here," I said evenly. He exhaled, relieved. "Good. This is just exploratory. No pressure. No pressure." The phrase almost made me smile. "Daniel," I said softly, "did your father ever seem worried to you?" "Worried? About what?" "About me being alone here." A pause. "I don't know," he admitted. "He trusted you." "Yes, he did." Friday would come. The realtor would walk through my hallway measuring wall lengths and ceiling height. Vanessa would smile that efficient smile. And somewhere in their minds, they would believe this was already settled. What they didn't understand was this. Harold hadn't prepared for my weakness. He prepared for their impatience. And if they crossed that line, if paperwork was filed without my signature, they wouldn't just lose an argument. They would lose everything he intended them to have. I folded my gardening gloves neatly on the porch table and went inside. Friday would not be the day I left this house. It would be the day they discovered whose house it truly was. Friday arrived with clear skies and the kind of bright spring light that makes everything look market-ready. Vanessa pulled into the driveway at 9:58 a.m. 2 minutes early. The realtor followed in a silver SUV. A man in his early 40s, crisp blazer, leather portfolio tucked under his arm. Efficient, confident, prepared. I was already on the porch when they stepped out of their cars. "Good morning, Eleanor," Vanessa said sweetly. "This is Tom. He's just going to take a look around." "Just." Tom extended his hand. "Very sorry for your loss, ma'am." "Thank you," I replied. "Please come in." The house was spotless. Not staged. Not hollow. Alive. The scent of lemon polish lingered lightly in the air. Fresh flowers sat on the entry table. The maple tree's shadow stretched across the living room rug just the way Harold liked in the mornings. Tom began with polite commentary. Beautiful hardwood floors. Solid structure. Great natural light. Vanessa walked beside him, nodding, already discussing comparable sales. "Homes on this block have gone for $620, even $640, she said. "Especially with minor updates." "Minor updates?" She glanced at the kitchen cabinets, the ones Harold and I painted ourselves. Tom paused at the staircase. "How old are the railings?" he asked. "Original," I said. "Installed in 1988. He made a note. They moved through the house like surveyors. Measuring walls. Estimating space. Calculating value per square foot. I followed quietly. When we reached the primary bedroom, Tom hesitated at the doorway. "Would you like me to skip this room for now?" he asked gently. Vanessa answered before I could. "It's fine. Fine." Tom stepped inside. The bed was neatly made. Harold's reading glasses still rested on the nightstand. The indentation on his pillow remained faintly visible if you knew where to look. Tom measured the closet. Vanessa discussed potential buyer demographics. I watched her carefully. Not grieving. Not reflective. Planning. Back downstairs, Tom closed his portfolio. "With the current market, I'd recommend listing within 2 to 3 weeks, he said. "We could photograph next Friday." "Next Friday." "So certain." Vanessa smiled. "That sounds perfect." "Perfect." Tom turned to me. "Of course, we'll need your signature on the listing agreement." There it was. The line. Vanessa looked at me expectantly. Daniel stood near the window, hands in his pockets, silent as always. I folded my hands calmly in front of me. "I won't be signing anything," I said. Silence settled into the room. Vanessa blinked. "It's just exploratory. And I appreciate the exploration," I replied evenly. "But this house is not being listed." Tom shifted slightly. Professional discomfort. Vanessa's voice tightened almost imperceptibly. "Eleanor, we discussed this." "You discussed it," I corrected gently. Daniel stepped forward. "Mom, we're trying to help." I looked at him fully for the first time that morning. Help would begin with asking, I said quietly. Vanessa's composure slipped for half a second. Tom cleared his throat. Perhaps I should step out while you all talk. Yes, I said kindly. That would be best. He left quickly. The front door clicked shut. Vanessa turned toward me, the softness gone from her expression. We're only thinking about your future. I held her gaze steadily. And my future, I said calmly, has already been thought about. Daniel frowned slightly. What does that mean? I did not answer. Not yet. Because the moment paperwork is placed in motion without my consent, the moment they attempt to move from suggestion to action, the amendment activates. Harold anticipated impatience. And standing there in my living room, watching Vanessa calculate her next move, I understood something clearly. They believed today was a setback. They had no idea it was a warning. And if they ignored it, the consequences would not be small. After Tom left, the house felt different. Not quieter, tighter. Vanessa didn't sit back down. She stood in the middle of the living room, arms folded lightly, like someone recalculating a strategy. Eleanor, she said carefully, we're trying to avoid this becoming difficult. Difficult. I walked to the side table and adjusted the framed photo of Harold holding Daniel at age 5. It had tilted slightly during the realtor's tour. What exactly is becoming difficult? I asked calmly. Daniel exhaled. Mom, you can't manage this place forever. I managed it yesterday, I replied. Vanessa's patience thinned. It's not about yesterday. It's about long-term practicality. The taxes, maintenance, safety. What if you fall? What if something happens and no one's here? There it was. The fear argument. I turned toward her slowly. If something happens, I said evenly, I will handle it. She gave a tight smile. That's not realistic. Realistic. The word lingered in the air like a challenge. Daniel rubbed his forehead. We already told Tom we were serious. It makes us look irresponsible to back out. There it was. Not concern. Embarrassment. Vanessa stepped closer to the dining table and placed her hand on the back of a chair. We're only asking you to think rationally. This house is an asset. Letting it sit here doesn't make sense. Letting it sit here, as if it were an idle vehicle, as if memories depreciate. I walked toward the window and looked out at the maple tree. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the porch Harold rebuilt board by board. Did you already sign something? I asked without turning around. Silence. Not long, but long enough. Daniel answered first. We discussed preliminary paperwork. Preliminary. Vanessa quickly added, nothing binding. Yet, I turned back to face them. If anything is filed without my consent, I said gently, that would be a mistake. Vanessa's eyes narrowed slightly. Are you threatening us? No, I replied. I'm informing you. Daniel looked confused. Informing us about what? I let the silence stretch again. This time I didn't fill it. Vanessa did. You're grieving, she said more sharply now. And grief clouds judgment. We're trying to protect you from making emotional decisions. Emotional. It's interesting how quickly calm is labeled unstable when it doesn't cooperate. I walked back to the table and picked up the Rosewood brochure. Assisted living, I said quietly. Within a month, wasn't that the plan? Daniel looked startled. How did you? Vanessa cut him off. We mentioned options. No, I said evenly. You mentioned timelines. Her composure cracked just slightly. You're being unreasonable. I folded the brochure in half and placed it neatly beside the folder Tom had left behind. No, I said calmly. I'm being prepared. Daniel stared at me now. Uncertainty replacing confidence. Vanessa, however, did not retreat. If you won't cooperate, she said carefully, we may need to. Look at legal guidance. Legal guidance. The word almost made me smile. Because 6 months ago, Harold had already sought it. They were standing in the house he protected, discussing leverage they did not have. I met her gaze steadily. You're welcome to seek any guidance you like, I said. And for the first time, I saw something flicker across her face. Not irritation, not impatience, concern. Because something in my tone had shifted. They still believed this was about property. They still believed pressure would work. What they didn't understand was this. The moment they take one documented legal step against me, the amendment becomes more than ink on paper. And when it does, they won't just lose this argument. They will lose everything Harold intended for them. And I will not raise my voice when it happens. The morning after Vanessa mentioned legal guidance, I drove downtown. I hadn't driven since the funeral. The steering wheel felt unfamiliar in my hands, as if the world outside my driveway had shifted slightly off balance. Robert Klein's office sits on the third floor of a brick building near Main Street. Same building, same polished brass nameplate. Harold and I had walked through those doors together more than once. This time, I walked in alone. Robert stood when I entered. "Eleanor," he said gently. I suspected this might happen. I took a seat across from his desk and placed my purse carefully on my lap. "They're escalating," I said. "Realtors, paperwork discussions, assisted living brochures." Robert nodded slowly, no surprise in his eyes. "Harold asked very specific questions 6 months ago," he said. "Questions about forced relocation, about asset pressure." I folded my hands together. "He knew," I said quietly. "He suspected," Robert corrected. "He told me. I don't want Eleanor cornered when I'm not there to stand beside her." For a moment, I looked down at the polished wood of his desk. Cornered. That was exactly what Vanessa had been trying to do. Robert opened a copy of the will and turned it toward me. "The amendment is airtight," he said. "But it requires documentation." Documentation of what? Intent. Pressure. Attempts to initiate sale or relocation without your written consent. I thought of Friday. The realtor walking through my bedroom. Vanessa discussing listing timelines. Daniel mentioning preliminary paperwork. "They've already spoken with an agent," I said. "And they implied something may have been signed." Robert's expression sharpened. "If anything has been filed or represented as authorized by you, that triggers immediate consequences." "And those consequences?" He didn't hesitate. "Daniel forfeits his inheritance." The word sat heavily between us. "Everything?" I asked. "Everything designated to him," Robert replied. "Which, as you know, includes substantial investment accounts and the lake property." The lake property. Daniel loved that place as a child. Fishing off the dock with Harold. He doesn't even know it's fully paid off. "And the funds?" I asked quietly. "Redirected to the Veterans Housing Foundation Harold selected." Harold always supported them quietly. Sent checks every December. I leaned back slightly. "They think I'm vulnerable," I said. Robert met my eyes. "Eleanor, you are grieving. That does not make you powerless." The distinction mattered. "What should I do?" I asked. "Say nothing further," he replied. "Let them act if they choose. The amendment protects you only if they initiate legal or financial movement without your consent. In other words, patience." When I left his office, the air outside felt cooler than it had that morning. Vanessa believed mentioning lawyers would intimidate me. Daniel believed urgency would persuade me. They were preparing strategy. What they did not know was that strategy had already been written, signed, filed, and waiting. As I drove home, I passed the hardware store where Harold used to buy lumber for weekend projects. The porch he rebuilt. The deck he stained every other summer. This house was never just wood and drywall. It was intention, and Harold's final intention was clear. If they push, if they file, if they attempt to move me against my will, they won't simply lose leverage. They will lose their inheritance. And this time, I will not warn them again. 3 days after my meeting with Robert, a certified letter arrived. I knew it was coming before I even saw the return address. Daniel's name. My hands did not shake when I signed for it. Inside was a single page. A notice of intent drafted by a local attorney. Polite. Clinical. Framed as concern. It stated that my son was seeking legal consultation regarding long-term care planning and asset protection considerations. Asset protection? For whom? The letter suggested that, given my recent bereavement and advanced age, discussions about selling the property and relocating to a managed facility would be in my best interest. Best interest. They had moved from suggestion to documentation. I placed the letter flat on the kitchen table and read it twice. Not for emotion. For detail. There it was, the line Robert told me to watch for. They were establishing a paper trail, framing me as vulnerable, preparing leverage. I folded the letter neatly and placed it inside the same cream folder Harold had left me. Then I picked up the phone. Robert answered immediately. "It's begun," I said calmly. There was no surprise in his voice. "Forward me the notice." Within the hour, I scanned the document and emailed it. Robert called back 20 minutes later. "That qualifies," he said simply. "Qualifies for what?" I asked, even though I already knew. "For triggering the amendment." The words did not feel dramatic. They felt final. Daniel had not listed the house yet. He had not filed a sale agreement. But by formally initiating legal positioning to override my autonomy, he had crossed the threshold Harold anticipated. He signed this. I asked. Yes, Robert replied. His signature is at the bottom. I closed my eyes for just a moment. Not in anger, in understanding. Vanessa hadn't forced his hand. He had chosen to sign. Robert continued. Once I send the response, the inheritance forfeiture becomes active. There is no reversal clause. No reversal. I stood at the kitchen window while he spoke. The maple tree swayed lightly. A neighbor walked her dog past the driveway. The world continued as if nothing had shifted. But something had. Proceed, I said quietly. Robert's response was steady. Very well. After we hung up, I made tea. Chamomile. Harold always said I brewed it too strong. I carried the cup to the living room and sat in his chair. The house was silent, but it did not feel fragile. It felt protected. Daniel believed this letter would pressure me into compliance. Vanessa believed formal language would intimidate me. What they didn't understand was this. The moment Daniel signed that notice, he didn't strengthen his position. He surrendered it. By attempting to legally position me as incapable of managing my own home, he activated the very clause designed to prevent that. Within days, Robert's official response would arrive at their doorstep. And when it did, it wouldn't argue. It wouldn't negotiate. It would simply inform them that, due to their actions, Daniel had forfeited every dollar, every asset, every property Harold intended to pass down. Redirected. Irrevocable. I took a slow sip of tea. They thought they were protecting their future. They had just erased it. And I never had to raise my voice to make it happen. The letter arrived at Daniel's house on a Tuesday morning. I know because he called me at 9:17 a.m. His voice was different. Not confident. Not rehearsed. Confused. Mom, what is this? I was in the kitchen watering the small basil plant near the window. The sun hit the leaves just right, the way Harold liked. I'm not sure what you're referring to, I said calmly. The attorney's letter, Daniel said. Papers rustled on his end. It says I've forfeited my inheritance. That can't be right. There was a pause. I could almost hear Vanessa in the background, whispering sharply. It is correct, I replied. Silence. Then Daniel again. This has to be some kind of mistake. We were just trying to plan ahead. Planning ahead, I said gently, does not include positioning your mother as legally incapable of managing her own home. That's not what we did, he insisted. Daniel, I said softly, you signed a notice. Another silence. Longer this time. Vanessa's voice cut in, louder now. Put it on speaker. I could hear her footsteps. This is ridiculous, she said firmly. We were acting in her best interest. The house is too much for her. Anyone can see that. Robert Klein can see it as well. I replied evenly. That's why the amendment was drafted. The amendment? Daniel asked. Yes, I said. Your father added a clause to his will 6 months ago. Papers shuffled again on their end. It states, I continued calmly, that if any beneficiary attempts to coerce, pressure, or legally maneuver to relocate me or sell the house without my written consent, that beneficiary forfeits their inheritance. There was no reply, so I continued. You signed a legal notice asserting concern over my competency and suggesting asset repositioning. That's standard procedure. Vanessa snapped. It is documented intent, I corrected gently. Daniel's breathing had changed. Shorter now. All of it, he asked quietly. Everything. Yes. The lake house too. Yes. Vanessa spoke again, but her voice no longer sounded sharp. It sounded thin. This is manipulation, she said. You set us up. I looked at Harold's chair across the room. No, I said calmly. Your father prepared. Another long silence. I could almost feel the shift happening in that house across town. The realization. The recalculation. You could fix this, Daniel said finally. You could tell the lawyer to retract it. I could, I agreed. If there were a retraction clause. And there isn't, he asked. No, the words settled heavily. Vanessa exhaled sharply. So what now? Now, I said evenly. The estate proceeds according to the updated will. To charity? Daniel asked. Yes. The Veterans Housing Foundation would receive what Harold once intended for his son. I did not say this with triumph. I said it with clarity. You chose to file that notice, I said quietly. You believed I wouldn't understand the consequences. Daniel did not argue. Vanessa did not speak. For the first time since the funeral, they had no next move. After we ended the call, I returned to watering the basil plant. The house felt steady. Protected. They tried to secure their future by removing me from mine. Instead, they removed themselves. And I never once raised my voice. They came to the house that evening. Not together. Daniel arrived first. He didn't knock the way he used to. 3 quick taps, and then calling out, "Mom," like he owned the place. This time he waited. I opened the door slowly. His shoulders looked smaller than I remembered. "Can I come in?" he asked. "You always could," I replied. He stepped inside and stood in the foyer, glancing around as if seeing the house differently now. Not as square footage. Not as equity. As something unreachable. "I didn't know," he said finally. "About the clause." "I know," I answered. He swallowed. "Vanessa said it was standard. That we were just being responsible." "Responsible to whom?" I asked gently. He didn't answer. A few minutes later, Vanessa arrived. Her car door shut harder than necessary. She walked in without removing her shoes this time. Her composure was back, but thinner. Less polished. "This didn't have to happen," she said immediately. "You could have talked to us." "I tried," I replied calmly. "You scheduled a realtor." She crossed her arms. "We were thinking about logistics. And I was thinking about autonomy," I said. Daniel looked between us. "The foundation," he said quietly. "Is it final?" "Yes." "Completely." "Yes." Vanessa let out a short breath. "So that's it. 40 years of planning. Gone because we tried to help." "No," I said evenly. 40 years of planning protected because you tried to override it." Silence filled the living room. Harold's chair sat untouched near the window. Vanessa's voice softened, shifting tactics. "You're alone here," she said. "That doesn't scare you?" "I am alone," I replied. "I am not incapable." Daniel sank into one of the dining chairs. "We thought you'd panic after Dad passed." "I did," I said quietly. "Just not in front of you." That landed. Vanessa's jaw tightened slightly. "What do you want from us now?" she asked. The question surprised me. "I want respect," I said. "Not money. Not apology. Respect." The house creaked softly as the evening temperature shifted. The maple tree brushed against the siding outside. Daniel stood slowly. "I messed up," he said. Vanessa didn't speak. There was something fragile in the air now, not grief, not anger. Consequences. "You can still see me," I added gently. "You can still come for dinner. You can still be my son." "And the estate?" he asked quietly. "That part," I said, "belongs to your father's decision." Vanessa's eyes flickered. For the first time, she looked uncertain, not strategic. They stayed only 15 minutes. When the door closed behind them, the house felt calm again. Not victorious. Stable. They had tried to secure their future by removing me from mine. Now they understood something they hadn't before. I was never the fragile piece on the board. I was the one protected by it. And Harold made sure of that long before they realized it mattered. It has been 3 months since the funeral. The lilies are long gone. The sympathy cards have been tucked into a drawer. But the house remains. I still wake up at 6:30 a.m., the way Harold did. I still make coffee in the blue ceramic mug he insisted was luckier than the others. I still open the front door each morning to let in the cool Ohio air and watch the maple trees shift with the wind. Some things change. Some things don't. Daniel comes by on Sundays now. Alone. He fixes small things around the house, tightened the porch railing last week, replaced a flickering hallway bulb. He doesn't stay for long. But he stays long enough. We don't talk about the inheritance. We talk about the weather, about his job, about the lake that no longer belongs to him. Vanessa hasn't visited since that evening. I don't ask about her. She made her calculations. Harold made his. And the law followed his. Last month, Robert sent confirmation that the estate redistribution had been finalized. The Veterans Housing Foundation sent a letter of gratitude. They plan to renovate 12 units this year. Harold would have liked that. He always said if money is going to matter, it should matter to someone who needs it. As for me, I am still here. The stairs haven't defeated me. The yard still grows. Property taxes are paid on time. I hired a young man from down the street to help with heavy lifting once a month. It costs less than pride and far less than surrender. Sometimes in the evening, I sit in Harold's chair and think about that day in the chapel. Vanessa's whisper, "We'll give it a month." She believed grief would blur my judgment. She believed silence meant weakness. She believed the house was the asset. But she misunderstood something fundamental. The house was never just wood and drywall. It was intention. It was partnership. It was 42 years of shared decisions made carefully and quietly. And Harold's last decision was not about punishment. It was about protection. They tried to bury my authority the same day they buried my husband. They assumed I would shrink. I didn't. I stayed. Not out of stubbornness. Not out of revenge. But because this was my home. And because the man who built this life with me made sure no one could erase me from it. The maple tree outside is taller now than it was when Daniel was 5. Roots run deeper than you realize, even when the branches look fragile. And that is the part they never understood. I was never the fragile one. I was the one who remained.